Cinema, the magic vehicle. Between the pages, scenes missing from the book, telling the untold stories of women in silent cinema.
When you start thinking about the very beginning of cinema, the origin story of film, we often fall into a predictable pattern, don't we?
Oh, absolutely.
It's the usual story of the founding fathers, Lumiere for capturing real life, Edison for the business side of things, and Georges Méliès for the magic, the fiction.
That narrative is so ingrained in film history, and it implies that the fundamental language of cinema, the close-up, the dramatic cut, the way story is told visually, was invented primarily, almost exclusively by men.
And that, historically, is where this begins. Because that narrative, while it's neat and simple, is fundamentally flawed.
It's completely flawed. The correction isn't just a footnote. It's a necessary upheaval of the entire timeline. We have to acknowledge the true originator of narrative fiction on film, Alice Guy Blaché.
Okay, let's unpack this right out of the gate. Who was she, and what exactly did she do?
So Guy Blaché was just 23 years old when she directed a structured narrative film. It was called La Fée aux Choux, or The Cabbage Fairy, in 1896.
1896.
Yes. And this was before Méliès fully abandoned his stage tricks and focused on major cinematic fiction. So by any real historical measure, Guy Blaché is recognized as the first person to use the film camera to tell a conceived story.
Her name was just sidelined.
Completely.
So our mission for you, the listener, today is clear.
Right.
We are basically conducting an autopsy on a historical erasure. We're not just here for an exercise in, filling quotas or representation.
No, we need to know why this happened.
Exactly. Was this erasure accidental, reflecting low-quality work that just naturally fell away? Or was it a systematic event built into the changing film industry and the way history was written?
And that's the crucial test, right? Do the surviving works of these early female pioneers actually stand up to the works of the men who ended up replacing them in the canonical textbooks?
Okay, let's start with the scale of their presence. Because to understand how they were erased, we have to grasp just how dominant they once were. Think about the period between the 1890s and, say, the early 1920s.
Early cinema was wild. It was low prestige, highly unstable, commercially speaking.
It wasn't seen as this high art form yet.
Not at all. It overlapped with existing, less capital-intensive fields like photography and vaudeville theater. And because of this low barrier to entry, women were not marginal. They were absolutely central structural pillars of the burgeoning industry.
And their positions of power were astounding. Alice Guy Blaché, after her directorial debut, she didn't just stay on the floor. She became the head of film production for Gaumont,
which was one of the largest film companies in the world at the time.
I mean, think about the responsibility there.
She was overseeing hundreds of productions, managing crews, pioneering new technical standards. And when she moved to the U.S. in the early 1910s, she wasn't content to be an employee. She built and ran her own company, Solax Studios, in Fort Lee, New Jersey.
Solax was putting out hundreds of films. They were absolutely competing in terms of scale and production value with their male contemporaries. This wasn't some tiny boutique firm.
No, and this is where her technical innovation really comes in. She wasn't afraid to push boundaries. She was an early experimenter with synchronized sound using the chronophone system, which was Gaumont's early attempt to pair film with a record player.
Wow.
And crucially, she also directed her actors away from the broad, theatrical, over-the-top gesturing that defined early film.
She coached them for emotional realism.
Yes, which sounds standard now, but it was revolutionary then. She wanted internal, believable performances.
That's fascinating. So she was defining acting for film at the same time she was defining the shot.
Exactly. Then you have Lois Weber in Hollywood. By the mid-1910s, she was not just directing, she was a massive commercial success. She became one of the highest paid directors, male or female, at Universal.
That's serious leverage. She was commanding huge budgets in the studio system before it was even fully formalized.
And what she did with that power is even more compelling. Weber did not make light, fluffy entertainments. Her films were deep moral inquiries. She tackled massive, controversial social issues head-on.
Like what kind of issues?
Films about contraception, abortion, prostitution, capital punishment. She was using the medium to force dialogue, and the public responded.
So if they were so commercially successful in innovating formally, how did their legacy just disappear? You mentioned the archives.
This is the uncomfortable truth we have to face. Something like 75 to 80% of all silent era films are just lost.
Gone.
Gone. It's due to the combination of nitrate stock decomposition and vault fires. It's an enormous amount of history just chemically vaporized.
That's a staggering loss.
Yeah.
But it affected everyone, right? How does that specifically explain the erasure of women's work?
Because it wasn't purely chemical, it was fundamentally archival and organizational. As the industry centralized, as those smaller, often women-led studios like Solax were swallowed up or collapsed, their existing film catalogs were neglected.
Okay, so the surviving negatives and prints of male contemporaries, who often moved into larger, more stable studios, they were prioritized.
Precisely. So when a studio went under, the financial incentive to save Lois Weber's films was lower than, say, saving the films of a director who just got a massive contract with Paramount.
I see.
And then came the reclassification. Credits were removed, simplified, or even reassigned to male producers or executives when the prints were occasionally rediscovered years later. We are often left to judge historical absence as proof of inferiority. We can't canonize what we can't physically see.
But that absence was often manufactured through institutional neglect.
That's the key.
Okay, let's pivot from absence to presence. Enough material has survived to actually conduct the formal analysis, which is the most exciting part. We can see their genius directly. Let's look closer at Lois Weber's 1913 short film, Suspense.
This film is a masterpiece of technical execution. It completely demolishes the idea that women lacked formal mastery or were only capable of simple domestic dramas.
The plot is pretty simple, right? A wife is trapped by an intruder while her husband rushes home.
Right. But Weber's cinematic language is anything but simple. She uses the split-screen technique in a wildly innovative way. Specifically, she employs a three-way triangle split screen.
So you're seeing three actions simultaneously.
Yes. The anxious intruder at the door, the terrified wife inside, and the husband racing through the streets, all on screen at once.
That creates a stunning geometric tension. You, the viewer, are constantly pulled between three different spaces, yet they're all collapsed onto one screen. It's the visual representation of claustrophobia and panic.
It forces that psychological state. But there's another moment of pure genius in that car chase. As the husband speeds away, she inserts a shot where we see the police pursuing him reflected in the side view mirror of his car.
That's complex perspective manipulation for 1913. That's not just a clever detail.
No, it's a brilliant move to inject subjectivity. By placing the action in the mirror, she positions you, the audience, in the anxiety of the pursued. It's an early example of using the camera not just to observe, but to literally immerse the viewer in the character's internal emotional crisis.
And this innovation wasn't isolated to Hollywood or New York. If we look across the Atlantic, we find Elvira Notari operating in Naples, Italy, around the same time.
Notari is fascinating. She ran Dora Film between 1906 and 1930 and directed 60 feature films. She completely rejected the dominant prestige film trend in Italy.
Which was what? These huge historical epics?
Exactly. These massive, often tedious historical epics, the cinematic equivalents of Roman columns.
So what did she turn her camera toward instead?
She turned it onto the visceral, raw texture of Naples. Films like A Santanaut focused on working-class urban life, using what she called transito, or street walking. She used the mobility of the camera to capture the vibrant, unchoreographed movements of the city.
So she wasn't trying to capture grand history. She was capturing the everyday struggles and vibrancy of the street.
That's it. She used non-professional actors, captured genuine local slang, and shot extensively on location.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture.
Many historians now see her work as proto-neorealism, a movement that captured post-war Italian authenticity with street-level filming and non-actors. She was doing this 2 or 3 decades before Rossellini and De Sica were celebrated for it.
Wow. So it suggests that the history of neorealism doesn't start with the wreckage of World War II.
No. It starts with an Italian woman in Naples deciding she didn't want to film ancient Romans anymore. She was charting entirely new territory that would later be defined as revolutionary when men picked up the thread decades later.
This brings us to the comparative gauntlet. We need to take these established male masters and look directly at the women's work to see if the innovation truly holds up. Let's start with the most celebrated figure in early American cinema, D.W. Griffith.
Right. Griffin is legendary as the master of the crosscut. In films like The Lonedale Operator from 1911, he uses cutting to accelerate the rescue, to drive the tempo forward.
The famous race to the rescue. It gets faster and faster, building narrative urgency.
His editing is focused on external, thrilling, mechanical action. Now, compare that to Lois Weber's cutting and suspense just 2 years later. While she uses cross-cutting, her key technique, the split screen, fundamentally changes the goal.
It doesn't accelerate the action.
It collapses the space.
So Griffith is focused on speed, while Weber is focused on compression.
Yes. Griffith's cross-cutting gives you external heroic momentum. Weber's split screen and her extreme high-angle shots, where the camera looks down sharply on the villain, are used for internal psychological effect. She destabilizes you, forcing you into the victim's immediate mental state of fear and paranoia.
It's a surgical approach to editing versus a mechanical one.
And Weber's sophistication is undeniable.
Let's move on to subjective interiority, the expression of deep internal emotion. The canonical figure here is often F.W. Murnau. His 1927 film Sunrise is celebrated for its unfastened camera and the fluid visualization of subjective feeling.
It's an incredible film, but we have to look at Germaine Dulac's La Souriante Madame Boudère from 1923, which predates Sunrise by 4 years.
And she was a central figure in the French Impressionist avant-garde.
Right, and she was using the camera to map state of mind, not just record reality. The film is about a woman trapped in a suffocating, unhappy marriage. Dulac uses cinematic tricks, slow motion, visual distortion, superimposition, to visualize the protagonist's intense domestic oppression.
She isn't just showing us the husband, she's showing us the effect of the husband on her mind.
Precisely.
I'm thinking of that shot where the husband's laughter is stretched and distorted into this grotesque, mocking figure. She makes the mundane horror visually expressive.
It's pure visual psychology. She was making the invisible internal life of a woman visible on screen in a way that was completely rigorous. The later classification of this kind of work as sentimental or minor art is just completely refuted the moment you perform this kind of formal analysis.
So we have undeniable commercial presence, innovation across genres and nations, and formal rigor that rivals and sometimes predates the established canon. We have to circle back to the central mystery, the mechanism of erasure. If the quality was there, the problem was institutional.
It was an industry-wide. I wouldn't call it a conspiracy, but an exclusion driven by capital. Around the early 1920s, the film business centralized. Studios adopted what's called vertical integration, controlling production, distribution, and exhibition.
And filmmaking became a high capital investment. The era of low-cost entrepreneurial risk-taking was over. The game got expensive.
It got very expensive. That casual, accessible, get-up-and-go atmosphere that allowed women to thrive and build studios like Solax vanished overnight. When the cost of entry becomes prohibitive, the power structure immediately becomes restricted.
And crucially, the job of director itself was redefined.
Yes, it was rebranded as technical leadership. The director became the chief foreman of a massive, expensive industrial process, a high-status, high-capital role that was explicitly institutionally coded as masculine.
So the perception shifted from artist creating a story to engineer commanding a technical crew,
which systematically pushed women out.
But the institutional bias didn't end when the women left the production studios. It continued into the academic sphere.
Oh, yes. The actual film canon we inherited was built by male historians and writers in the 1930s through the 1950s. They were often using literary and military metaphors to describe film. They looked for great men, conquest, and epic scope.
They were celebrating films like Griffith's Civil War epics or Abel Gantz's Napoleon.
They were looking for films that mirrored traditional male definitions of power, absolutely, and they simultaneously devalued the themes women specialized in.
The films of Weber, of Dulac.
They focused on ethics, intimacy, the social causation of domestic distress, the nuances of private life.
And these themes were then relabeled by the historians.
They were classified as women's films, and therefore deemed sentimental, didactic, or minor. They were excluded from the official definition of cinema itself, cementing their erasure not based on technical or artistic merit, but based on subject matter.
When you look back today, those definitions collapse completely. Alice Guy Blachet's insistence on naturalistic acting feels far more modern than the theatrical posturing of many of her male contemporaries.
Or look at Lois Weber's 1912 short Falling Leaves. It tells a whole sophisticated story about a child's misunderstanding of illness with incredible narrative economy.
This is why this reclamation matters so much beyond just fairness or representation. Our understanding of film grammar is deeply incomplete without them.
It is. If we ignore Elvira Notari, we misunderstand the true geographic and thematic roots of neorealism. If we ignore Lois Weber, we miss a profound alternative path that editing and narrative structure could have taken.
These women weren't just participating. They were defining the very syntax of the medium we still study today. They were highly capable professional studio heads and innovators who routinely commanded budgets and controlled full productions.
They didn't need permission to invent the art form. So to reclaim this legacy, you have to do the work. You need to view the surviving films, watch Suspense, watch La Souriante Madame Baudet,
And acknowledge that the history of cinema was not a straight line drawn by a few celebrated figures.
It was a dense, complex organizational web, and half of the essential threads were systematically untied and hidden by the subsequent historical narrative.
So the central question we are left with, and the one we want you to mull over, is this. The quality of their work was evident. Their innovation was pioneering. Why did we allow the very definition of a cinematic masterpiece to be drawn so narrowly, so exclusively, that it actively excluded those who invented the language in the first place?